Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started as people are joining. So welcome everybody to today's Ask the Experts webinar. My name is Sarah Reese, and on behalf of Driven to Protect, would like to welcome you all here. Before we begin, wanted to take a moment to familiarize you all with this platform. If you go to the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you can adjust your viewing settings. I have muted all attendees on video and audio so we don't have any distractions. If you do have any technical issues, you can use the chat function along the bottom of your screen. It looks like a chat bubble, and I can help you address those issues. We will have a moderated Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So you can, throughout the session, submit any questions for panelists using the Q&A function. You can click on the three dots at the bottom of your screen to find that. We ask that you direct the questions to all panelists. That way we can make sure that they are seen and don't get overlooked. And we will follow up with any questions that we don't get to address today. And this webinar will be recorded and posted to dads.org following the conclusion of today's event. I will now hand things over to Mr. George Bishop, Deputy Commissioner of the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles, to moderate today's webinar.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. And welcome to today's Ask the Expert webinar. We're very excited to have you join in with us. My name is George Bishop. I'm the Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Motor Vehicles. And Virginia is extremely proud to be the first state to partner with the Driver Alcohol Detection System for Safety, or DADS, and to support their efforts to build and implement an in-vehicle technology that dares to envision a world where drunk driving and the death and suffering caused by it has been eliminated. It's a bold effort, to be sure. And during today's Ask the Expert webinar, we will learn much more about the work that's being done to bring this in-vehicle alcohol detection technology one step closer to reality, one step closer to eliminating drunk driving and saving lives on our roads. I'll be moderating the discussion, the presentations, and the Q&A session. And I do want to remind everyone that this webinar is called Ask the Experts, not Listen to the Experts. So we do hope that we are going to get a lot of questions from those who are participating in the webinar. This panel is a great collection, has a wealth of knowledge on the subject. They, in fact, are the experts, and this is your opportunity to ask them any question that you have related to DADS or the Driven to Protect program. I'd first like to kick everything off by providing an overview of DADS as technology and the Driven to Protect program. As many of us know, each year, drunk driving claims over 10,000 lives in the United States and costs approximately $194 billion. The DADS, the Driver Alcohol Detection System for Safety, or DADS, program is researching a first-of-its-kind technology that holds the greatest potential we've seen to reverse this trend. The DADS in-vehicle alcohol detection technology will detect if a driver's blood alcohol level is more than the legal limit, and if so, will prevent that vehicle from moving. The DADS program is the result of one of the most important public-private partnerships in many years, bringing together the automotive industry, represented by the Automotive Coalition for Traffic Safety, or ACTS, and NHTSA, or the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Recognizing the potential of the DADS technology to save lives by preventing drunk driving, Virginia used a portion of our NHTSA Highway Safety grant funds to partner with the DADS program and to launch the Driven to Protect initiative. Through Driven to Protect, DADS has conducted in-vehicle, on-road test trials of the alcohol detection technology in fleet vehicles in both Norfolk and Richmond, Virginia. We've also been giving Virginians an early look at the technology by bringing prototypes of the vehicles and a custom-built learning experience trailer to events across our Commonwealth, and indeed to several states across the country. Meanwhile, development and testing process is going strong both in KEA's labs and at McLean Hospital, a Harvard Medical School affiliate where DADS is conducting human subject testing through controlled experiences designed to safely mimic real-world drinking scenarios. Driven to Protect is improving traffic safety to save lives, both by deepening understanding of the dangers of drinking and driving and by developing breakthrough technology that will one day help to eliminate alcohol-related crashes. We are very excited to share more about this program and the technology with you today. Now, during this webinar, we're going to hear from 3 experts as they talk about their involvement in DADS and the Driven to Protect program and the rigorous development and testing process behind the DADS alcohol detection technology. The webinar will be structured to include about 30 minutes for our panelists to discuss the work that they're doing and about 45 minutes of Q&A afterwards. Many of you have submitted questions in advance, but we'll also be taking questions in the Q&A feature of the WebEx. I'll explain more about how our Q&A will work when we shift to that part of the program. But now, I am pleased to introduce the first of our panelists for this Ask the Expert webinar, Dr. Bud Zaouk, who is President and CEO of KEA Technologies. Bud leads the team of independent engineers and scientists who are making sure that the DADS technology meets the standards of durability, accuracy, and precision that are essential for an in-vehicle safety technology. Bud, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, George, and welcome everyone, and thank you for participating in this webinar. I'll start by giving an overview of our development process and our testing process, and then we'll move on to Dr. Lukas, and he'll give us a little more understanding of some of the human subject testing that we're doing. But early in the program, we conducted a global technology scan where we evaluated different alcohol detection technologies, alcohol measurement concepts. We essentially afterwards narrowed down these technologies to 2 different types of concepts that we felt are the most suitable for in-vehicle application. And here, the key element is in-vehicle application. These devices had to work inside a vehicle compartment in a vehicle environment. And when we're talking about a vehicle environment, it's, snow, hot weather, cold weather, wet weather, shaking, vibrating, all types of conditions that a vehicle has to go through. So we narrowed down to 2 different concepts, and these are the concepts that I'll be talking about today. So when it comes to measuring the person's breath alcohol concentration, most people are familiar with the breathalyzers that require drivers to provide a deep lung sample by blowing into a tube or into an inlet of a sensor. One of the things that we differentiate ourselves in this perspective is that we use a system, a concept of a breath-based system that's being developed by Sensair that is unobtrusive to analyze the driver's breath alcohol. Driver simply has to breathe normally, and the sensors will pick up on that breath and be able to analyze it and analyze the presence and the quantity, eventually the quantity of alcohol that they have. The way the sensor typically works is by drawing the driver's exhaled breath into the sensor, and that measures the concentration of carbon dioxide and, if detected, the presence of alcohol. This quantity of, we know how much a human being exhales carbon dioxide. That's a known quantity, and it's an indicator of what we call the dilution factor, or how far the driver, in this case, is from the sensor. How diluted is this alcohol concentration in the exhaled air? And in this case, dilution is the ratio of the carbon dioxide in the sample versus what you typically exhale, and that's about 4.1% typically. But we use that to extrapolate the percent of alcohol in a sample to the percent of alcohol in an undiluted sample. So these molecules of alcohol and those traces, like carbon dioxide, absorb the infrared light at specific wavelength. The Sensair sensor directs the infrared light beam on the breath sample and analyzes the wavelength returned to quickly determine the presence of alcohol and calculate the alcohol concentration. The sensor itself is highly sensitive. It's able to analyze diluted breath samples at dilutions that are expected from a natural exhaled plume. When we started early on, we started with generation 1 of these sensors back in 2011. And these were directed breath at close proximity from the sensor. And since then, we've really made significant progress. Some of the key technological breakthrough happened when we launched the Gen 3.0 platform, and that led to subsequent versions of Gen 3.1 and 3.2. Gen 3.2 is currently the sensor that we're working with and have been testing for the past 10 months. And it's an engineering prototype type of sensor that's allowing us to start looking at how we can passively sniff inside the cabin at the proximity of the driver. And at the same time, it increased the distance where the driver can provide a directed breath to the sensor. So for example, we used to, in generations 1 through 2 and even 3.0 and 3.1, we should need to be approximately probably 3 to 5 inches, no more. With Gen 3.3 now, we're able to go as far as 10 to 12, 10 to 15 inches with a directed breath and be able to sniff the presence of alcohol inside of a cabin. So that's how fundamentally the breath sensor and where the breath sensor is at today. On the touch sensor, the touch system, essentially the way the touch sensor works is by shining a near infrared light into the finger, and a portion of that light is reflected back off the skin surface, and into the touchpad where when it gets analyzed, and the light itself contains the optical signature of alcohol if it's detected. And from there, we're able to measure and quantify how much alcohol. The touch sensor itself is broken down into 4 different components, and you see here on the image in front of you, there's a light source, which is one of the key elements. Optics, and this is the glass where the touchpad is, where light is reflected and light is analyzed, and then the algorithm and electronics. And those are, key elements in how we analyze that data and how we process that data and how fast we can provide that information. Our early prototypes use an FTIR system that used a black body type of a light source, and essentially that shines the light into the finger, that black body light source into the finger. Refracted light is analyzed using what's called an interferometer, which is essentially a beam splitter, and that's the optics element, and directs a portion of the light into the alcohol detector. This type of approach was suitable from a proof of concept perspective, but really was not appropriate for automotive application. The FTIR itself, or what we call the Michelson interferometer, contain these precision glass and mirrors that are spinning and moving and are just not appropriate for automotive application. This meant that we had to really find a better way to be able to implement this technology into vehicles. And that led us down a path of laser spectrometry, where instead of using this black body light source and splitting the light into the various wavelengths needed to find where alcohol is, we use lasers in this case. And these lasers shine a light in the specific wavelength where we've identified alcohol is present, and eliminate an element of complexity into the system. In our early prototypes and our early FTIR system, we discovered that we can see alcohol in 40 different wavelengths in the light spectrum. And what that led us is on a roadmap of development for our light source, our laser system in this case, where we went from starting with 40 lasers that interrogate 40 wavelength, down to 20 lasers that can do 40 wavelength, down to 10 lasers, again, still looking at 40 wavelength. And now we've early in this year, actually, sometime around the March timeframe, we really made another breakthrough in technology where we're now able to tune a single laser to cover a large spectrum of the wavelength. And what we anticipate is that using this technology, we'll be able to use 2 to 4 wavelength to be able to cover the entire 40 wavelength that we need, 2 to 4 lasers, I apologize, to cover the 40 wavelength that we need to find alcohol. And where we are in the development process at the moment is we have a good handle on our light source. Our lasers are working very well. We've been working with our laser supplier in Germany, NanoPlus, and what that led us is now that we have a good handle on the light source, we need to look at our optics. And our focus right now is on the optical development of the sensor. But we hope to have a touch-based sensor deployed in a vehicle in Virginia by the end of 2021. And again, this will be another first for the state of Virginia. As we're doing all this, we also discovered that verification and validation is really going to be one of our key aspects of this technology development effort. And we're putting significant amount of effort and resources into verifying and validating this technology, whether it's in the lab or in the field. We're not only inventing new technologies, but we're also inventing new test equipment, test procedures, human surrogates, acceptance criteria, all kinds of innovations that are happening just to make sure that this technology is going to work properly, that it's going to do what it's supposed to do in the field. It's been a much bigger task than we originally envisioned, to be honest. We started with a what's called the wet bath solution, which is a typical glass jar. And that itself evolved, and that's the typical device that's used to calibrate breathalyzers today. And that evolved into developing a mechanical lung, essentially, that you can see right behind me in the back right corner. But this mechanical lung really replicates what a human lung does. It allows us to precisely and accurately dial in any alcohol concentration, but also including all the other elements like carbon dioxide, like humidity in the breath, all while maintaining that extreme precision and accuracy that we need. We've also developed the portable lung. As we started getting out of the lab, we needed to actually be able to do some of the testing outside the lab and inside the vehicles that we were integrating with the sensors. So we developed a portable lung that we can use in the field and provides a controlled pre-mixed breath samples that simulates a human breath that we can test the sensors integrated into these vehicles. We also developed a substance that replicates what a human tissue looks like, both in composition and the way it absorbs the refracted light. Basically, we had to replicate a human finger so we can test our touch sensor as we're moving in our touch sensor development. And along the way, we had to develop DATS performance specifications to kind of essentially guide the development of the sensors and make sure that they're going to work in the right environment, whether it's in a vehicle under different conditions of extreme temperatures, low temperature, high temperature, or under vibration and shock and so forth. And this led us to the current SAE, Society of Automotive Engineer, J3214 standard that we are currently developing for fleet application. This is work in progress, and we hope to deploy it by the end of the year. But this will be the standard by which these sensors, specifically the breath-based sensor, will be tested against. And in terms of our, as we're going through our verification and validation process, we developed a three-pronged approach for this process so that we can make sure that these sensors work under real-world conditions. We start in a very controlled environment, and this is the lab that you see behind me. That's our real controlled environment. And then we move on to semi-controlled, where we take the sensors and introduce them with humans. And that's where Dr. Scott Lukas is going to talk a little bit more about. And then the third, which is what I call the Wild Wild West, or the fully uncontrolled environment, is taking the sensor, putting it, integrating into the vehicles, and then now you have the human element and the environment around it. So shock, vibration, temperature, everything else that comes within the vehicle environment. And going back to the lab, we test these sensors under extreme conditions. We test them, we characterize them. So when we receive a sensor from our supplier, Sensair, we perform some initial baseline tests, and then we characterize these sensors. We characterize them under different temperatures. So we characterize them under minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, under ambient conditions, 68 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and then under extreme heat, 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Then we test them at 0 alcohol concentration, 0.02, 0.05, 0.08, 1.0, and so forth. And the typical duration of these tests is about 5 days. So we can do a batch of 8 sensors that will take us about 5 days to characterize. We then take these sensors, integrate them into the vehicle. We integrate them into our human subjects driving vehicles, what we call the HSD vehicles. And again, Dr. Lukas will expand on that a little bit later. We run these vehicles for the next 6 to 9 months. Then at the end of that period, we pull these sensors out and we want to look and recharacterize them so we can look at if there's been any change in the performance of the sensor after they've been exposed to all these elements. And we keep doing that until we actually get the sensor performing in the proper way that we expect it to, and that it meets the standards that we're developing. And with that, I'll talk a little bit about the human subjects testing, human subjects driving, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Lukas, who's going to probably emphasize or provide more details on that. Our human subjects driving vehicles, we basically take the sensors, as I mentioned, from the lab, and those sensors go and get integrated into the vehicle. We instrument the driver side with 2 sensors, and then we instrument the passenger side with an additional 2 sensors. And this is primarily because we cannot have a drinking driver, obviously, but we want to be able to test these sensors using with the subjects that are dosed with alcohol. So we dose the passenger, and we put them in the passenger sensor in the passenger seat, and we drive them at a preset route for about 3 to 5 hours in different conditions, whether it's altitude or on the coast, to be exposed to corrosive environment, or in different temperatures in the winter and the fall and the summer, and then collect all that data. And as I mentioned, once the car comes back after 6 to 9 months of use, then we take those sensors out and re-characterize them to see if there's any drift in performance or any change in performance. We're also doing naturalistic driving studies through our partners with Virginia, state of Virginia, and Rob will talk a little bit more about that. But basically, that gives us really the 0 alcohol concentration, which is as critical as having the sensors exposed to an alcohol concentration, since the majority of the time, most people are going to have no alcohol when they get into their vehicle. So that 0 alcohol concentration is critical. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to George and subsequently Dr. Lukas to talk a little bit more about human subjects testing, human subjects driving.
Great. Thanks, Bud. You guys have done a fantastic job up to this point, and we are looking forward to what you are going to be able to achieve in the future. And, I love hearing that the in-vehicle tests that are the less controlled, the ones that we're doing in Virginia, are called the Wild Wild West. So now I can, we're very happy to consider Virginia the Wild Wild West. But that brings us to our next presenter, Dr. Scott Lukas, who's going to talk to us about the controlled human subject testing. Dr. Scott Lukas is the director of behavioral I knew I was going to get that wrong. Behavioral psychopharmacology research laboratory at McLean Hospital. Dr. Lukas leads the human subject testing of the DAS technology to ensure that it performs consistently with real people as it does in the lab. Dr. Lukas, welcome.
Thank you very much. And it is my great pleasure to be invited to this webinar and get an opportunity to share our work with you. And I really very much look forward to all your questions. The benchtop testing that you just heard about is so crucial to making sure that the devices perform at their designed and engineered and in controlled laboratory conditions. However, the precision, specificity, and reproducibility of these devices far exceeds that of the human body. The human body is a concatenation of all sorts of different variables. There's physiological, there's genetic, there's behavioral and environmental factors that affect the way the human body functions without alcohol. And now we're going to add alcohol to that mixture. This is why we started the human subject testing program, to measure how well these devices perform when used on a body in the real world. Now, the gold standard, of course, is blood alcohol concentration, or BAC. And so the human subject testing program is focused around demonstrating that the amount of alcohol that's detected in the breath or the tissue-based devices actually matches that's found in blood. Therefore, we get a good correlation between them. And so in order to do that, we have to design experiments where we can sample from all three of those compartments simultaneously. Now, the way we do it is that we put out advertisements for healthy adult male and female participants who report being what we would call quote unquote social drinkers, whatever your definition might be of that. My definition of that is 7 to 12 standard drinks per week. After they provide informed consent, and that's where we explain all the risks and the details of the experiments, they're given a full physical and a psychiatric evaluation. They get full blood chemistry, urine workup to make sure that they do not have any kind of underlying disorders that could make it unsafe for them to participate. Again, we have to make absolutely certain that these participants are not harmed by what we're doing. All women are given a pregnancy test during the screening period, and they are also, the pregnancy test is repeated anytime they come to the lab and participate in a study which they receive alcohol. They also receive urine drug screens for illicit and illicit drugs, and they're transported to and from the lab via Uber or taxi cab. So they are not allowed to drive themselves to the lab, and they certainly are not allowed to drive themselves home after they participated in the research. Now, in order to mimic the real world, we sat down and we designed a number of specific scenarios to test the devices. And these are shown on the right-hand side of your slide. If you can go to that next slide, click on. Oh, there it is. Got it. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. No, good. You're good. I apologize. My fault. There you go. On the right-hand side of your screen. The most important thing to remember here is that most of these scenarios that you see on the right side will actually alter blood alcohol curves. But what we are interested in is whether the amount of alcohol in breath and tissue actually follows that's measured in the blood. And this, in effect, is the litmus test for the devices, being able to accurately detect alcohol under these very different conditions. Now, for all of these, we follow the same basic procedure. The participant arrives in the morning, receives a breath test for alcohol, urine screen, pregnancy test, and then they're escorted to a special test room that is set up somewhat like the inside of a car, in that the breath sensors are placed around them, much like they would be located if they were in a car. Now, obviously, we're not simulating the car, but the distances of the breath sensors are the same, and the touch sensors down by their right thigh, which would be similar to where the gear shift knob would be. Now, once the experiment starts, they're then given a dose of alcohol to consume, and depending on the study, they can consume between 2 to 5 shots of vodka, either chugging it or as a bolus drink within 2 minutes, or spread out over time between 30 and 45 minutes. And that's to simulate some of the different scenarios that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. Now, lag time was the first experiment where we documented how long it takes for alcohol to appear in the blood, breath, and tissue. And that's why we called it lag time. We wanted to see whether there was any lag in showing up in any of these tissues. And I'll be showing you some data in a moment. And we did it under 2 different doses of alcohol, a low dose and a high dose. Now, everybody knows that when you drink on a full stomach or while you're having dinner or a meal, it makes you feel less intoxicated. And that is because the food in the stomach actually delays the absorption of the alcohol so that less of the alcohol gets into the small intestines and therefore less of it gets into the bloodstream. So we wanted to simulate what it would look like if you were going out and having dinner with drinks. So we actually simulated that scenario. We also wanted to simulate a different scenario, similar but different, in that what if you were to go to a bar and you decide to have a few drinks with friends, and instead of ordering dinner, you start to, snack on the chips or the pretzels or the beer nuts that are sitting on the counter there. So that scenario is also very important. And what we found is that, of course, alcohol indeed was reduced by food, and a greater decrease was observed in the full meal. Now, what if you wanted to go out dancing? Dancing and drinking is a very common activity. And so you want to have a few drinks while you're dancing. Well, we wanted to simulate that as well. And funny story, one of my staff actually bought one of those disco mirror balls and brought it into the lab, and she was shining a light on it. And she said it was to get the subjects in the mood so that they could show us their moves. But and so we were going to use one of those Dance Dance Revolutions. I think many of you remember that craze that they would be put up in different places. But we realized very quickly that it would be unsafe for them to actually dance in our environment because the IV catheter that's in their arm where we're drawing the blood samples might become dislodged. So instead, we decided to use a seated elliptical machine. And so basically moving the arms back and forth and the feet up and down like this was a good simulation of dance moves. And we put them through the paces and did some good moves with them. We also simulated last call, which is a common practice in many bars. And we're also currently studying the combinations of alcohol and energy drinks, non-alcoholic beer, which you should all know does contain a little bit of alcohol, and we can detect it on the breath, but it goes away very, very fast. We're also studying regular beer and wine to broaden the types of drinks that we study. Now, I just want to tell you, in case you're interested in participating, we will not be buying the really expensive wine. So don't think you're going to come in here and get 800-year-old wines. We're not going to be doing that. So we'll be using basic wines. Now, what did we find? All of these scenarios that I just described revealed one major consistent finding. The amount of alcohol was indeed altered by all of these experiments. Sometimes they were increased, sometimes it was decreased. But in each case, the amount that we measured in both the breath and the tissue samples matched that was measured in blood. And that proves the validity of using these devices as a passive method of detecting alcohol in a driver's system. Now, we've tested a number of other conditions that were specifically designed to target just the breath, such as hyperventilation and breath holding, or testing the tissue samples, such as making their hands very cold or very warm, or after using hand sanitizers. And I will tell you that each of those scenarios does have an impact on the measured alcohol concentration, but these effects are very, very short lasting, sometimes less than a minute. So that if you did have some issue with that, it would be gone in about 30 seconds. And finally, we're about to start some testing of the effects of drinking alcohol while at the same time they are smoking tobacco cigarettes, while they are vaping nicotine, and while they're smoking marijuana. So we have all the appropriate licenses in place so that we can study marijuana in combination of alcohol. And we're very excited to get started on these studies to make sure that a common practice of using these drugs together does not interfere with the operation of these devices. Now, on this next slide that you now see in front of you, this is some of the data that I promised I would share with you. Now, the way to read this curve is the blood alcohol concentration in percent is shown on the vertical axis or the ordinate as a function of time after we've given the alcohol. And each of the different devices is plotted using a different symbol. So blood is the red circles. The touch base technology is in the green, in the blue squares. The breath sensor system is in the green triangles, and the reference breathalyzer, which is the Alka-Sensor FST, which is our standard referential breath, is in the black triangles. And one of the things that you see how closely matched those are. Now, what I didn't plot on this is the standard error of the means, which would just muddy it up a little bit. You wouldn't be able to see it because they all overlap, indicating that they are not statistically significantly different. Now, one thing that you will notice, if you look at the far left of that graph, you'll see the words mouth alcohol. And so both of the breath-based devices, the Sensor and our Alka-Sensor FST, show a increased elevation in alcohol right after they drink the alcohol beverage. This is very common. It happens in every one of the breath-based. In fact, if you've ever gone out and purchased one of those little handheld breathalyzers, they will do the same thing. So they're not really accurate right after you've consumed the alcohol because a little bit of the alcohol stays inside your mouth. And so what you're doing is when you would exhale that high concentration, which is not reflective of what's in your blood, is actually going through the device. Now, what I've also plotted on here for reference is the legal limit of driving in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and in the rest of the states of the Union is 0.08. And you can see that in our experiments, we do these experiments purposely to push the limits and make sure that we go way above the limits. So we are measuring the blood alcohol concentration and the performance of these devices during the time when the blood alcohol is rapidly rising, when the blood alcohol levels are now distributing through the rest of the body, and then also as the blood alcohol starts to decrease over time, which is the metabolic profile. We wanted to make sure that the devices performed over the entire spectrum. And then the last thing I wanted you to draw your attention to on this curve is the typical blood alcohol concentration after 2 glasses of wine with dinner. And you can see quite clearly that these individuals, this is a group mean, come nowhere near getting to the legal limit of intoxication. Now, finally, the next slide shows the naturalistic human subject in vehicle driving that Dr. Zaouk referred to. We also are managing some of those studies as well. And this is what I call the second part of human testing, to put these devices in an automobile, actually on both sides, as you've already heard. The driver and the front seat passengers get exactly the same sensors, one in front and one on the door. And in this picture here, you can see there's a woman, the upper right-hand corner of the woman, she's just sitting there. This is the passenger. And the 2 sensors are painted in a bright orange so that you can see them more clearly here. Now, that same sensor setup is set up for the driver. Now, we use professional drivers. And again, as Dr. Zaouk already pointed out, the driver does not consume alcohol, but the passenger does. And so in this way, we're able to simulate what that environment might look like. And now we can put those devices, put those prototypes to the test and drive all over. So we've chosen a number of routes around the Boston area that takes the car up into the mountains. They go to the beach. They go through downtown Boston and through various temperatures and humidity. And I saw by the registration list, a number of you are in the Boston area. So you guys all know how many potholes we have. So the cars and the devices have been given a pretty good beating up to this point. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob Schlesinger because he's going to then take you to the next level. But I just wanted to, again, point out that the marriage of this particular program of working with engineers, working with the benchtop testing, such as you see at KA Technologies, and then putting it in our hands allows us to mirror both. And so in reality, I give feedback to his team, to Dr. Zaouk's team, and then they can improve on these devices. And that iterative process is what makes this program very successful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lukas. And I really look forward to hearing more about the human subject testing as we get to the question and answer phase. I know that I had some myself. I'm sure that those who are participating in the webinar have some as well. And a reminder that if you do have those questions, please utilize the question and answer feature of WebEx to submit your question. And finally, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Rob Strassburger, who is President and CEO of the Automotive Coalition for Traffic Safety, or ACTS. Rob has worked in the automotive industry for over 38 years. He directs the DADS program and manages the Driven to Protect partnership with Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles. Rob, welcome. Welcome to the seminar, to the webinar. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, George, and welcome everybody. We're going to pivot here a little bit. You've heard Dr. Zaouk and Dr. Lukas describe, everything that we're doing to rigorously develop and test the sensors in a technical way, but that is not our sole focus with the DADS program. We are also looking at how we can help ensure the success of this technology when we're ready to put it into vehicles and consumers' hands. And that's slightly different than how we've approached things in the past, where perhaps there wasn't as great attention focused on the consumer and their reaction to the technology. So our collective success in significantly reducing alcohol-impaired crashes and the associated deaths, injuries, and family grief will depend on all of us working collaboratively towards achieving a zero goal. This means continuing to use the tools that we know are effective, strong laws visibly enforced, consumer information about those laws and the dangers of driving after drinking, and developing technological interventions and implementing them when they are ready and have been proven effective. In the case of DADS or any technology, its success is going to be a function of its effectiveness, certainly, but also whether it is accepted and used by consumers. This may seem like a truism, like saying water is wet. But if consumers don't think drunk driving is bad, not their responsibility because they don't drink, or worse, they're right if they do, they will reject the technology or be motivated to defeat it. And the technological intervention won't do for us what we want it to do, and we won't make progress. Building consumer awareness and acceptance and demand for DADS technologies is the foundation upon which the Driven to Protect initiative is built. The initiative was begun in 2017 through the fantastic partnership with the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles Highway Safety Office. Next slide, please. The initiative has two main components. First, with the very enthusiastic support of James River Transportation. Starting in 2018, we began testing in a naturalistic driving environment, prototype DADS breath sensors in some of JRT's Ford Flex livery vehicles operating out of the Richmond and Norfolk airports. To date, these vehicles have been in operation approximately 2 years, racking up roughly 52,000 miles. More importantly, our sensors have been operating nearly 8,000 hours, multiple sensor lifetimes, and have recorded nearly 50,000 breath samples. We use the data collected to assess the performance of these sensors, which drive design refinements and ever more robust breath alcohol algorithms. This data supplements the data we collect under controlled laboratory conditions and in the clinical setting, which have just been described by Dr. Lukas and Dr. Zaouk. The main component of the other main component of the initiative is our consumer outreach. Since the beginning of the initiative in 2017, we have hosted roughly 30 events around the Commonwealth to educate Virginians about the dangers of driving after drinking, provide them actionable information to help them avoid those dangers, including information derived from our own clinical and on-road testing, provide information about the DADS technologies and how Virginians will benefit from these technologies in the future, and allow Virginians to experience firsthand DADS technologies for themselves. We've been at NASCAR races, minor league ball games, local fairs and festivals, and safety conferences. To date, we have reached 1 in 10 Virginians, nearly 1 million people around the Commonwealth. Unfortunately, like everything these days, in order to protect the health and safety of everyone, we have temporarily suspended our in-person events because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But just like our own technology invention efforts, we are motivated to overcoming challenges. In order to continue our outreach, and perhaps ironically, likely significantly expand it, we are launching an online DADS Discovery Hub. At that Discovery Hub, you will be able to experience everything that you would have if you are visiting one of our in-person events and more. Look for this hub to launch later this month. Today's the 27th, so it's not far away. The Driven to Protect initiative has not gone unnoticed. In 2019, the initiative was awarded the Governor's Honor Award for Public-Private Partnerships, given by Governor Ralph Northam. And this year, the initiative is one of 3 finalists for the Green Cross for Safety Award for Safety Innovation, to be awarded by the National Safety Council in October. Through Driven to Protect, Virginia continues to put the health and safety of its residents first by educating the next generation about responsible driving behavior and by advancing technology that can prevent additional drunk driving crashes, injuries, and deaths on its roads. Thank you. And George, back to you.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. And thank you very much for your kind words about working with Virginia. We, of course, value the partnership just as much as you, and you guys are really wonderful partners. So we are now getting into the section of our webinar wherein we are going to have question and answer phase. And so let me start by just going over a little bit, once again, about how to submit your question. As I said earlier, this presentation is called Ask the Experts, and this is the part where you get to ask our experts anything that you have on your mind related to DADS or the Driven to Protect program. we have some great questions that we received during the event registration, but obviously we're also accepting questions at this point now using the Q&A feature. If you are, again, if you don't know how to use that, I'll try to give you a clue. There's at the bottom of your screen, you should see a circle with 3 dots in it. That 3-dot icon is the Q&A window. And if you pop open the Q&A window, you can send your questions. And please send all of your questions to our event host, who is Sarah Reese. And she will be then assigning those questions when they come in. And finally, we're going to do our best to get to as many of your questions as possible during our remaining time. But if you want to be sure that your question is answered, even if we can't get to it during the webinar, please include your email address when you send the question, and we'll be very happy to respond to you directly after the event. So without any further ado, I'd like to get started with the first question that I have up here. And this one is, well, this one is really for all of you, but and Rob, I think you addressed this when you talked about how you'd adapted your outreach efforts due to COVID-19. But Dr. Lukas, I'm curious as to how COVID-19 has impacted your human subject testing, and then perhaps Bud, how it might have impacted testing and development in the laboratory. So I'm going to start though with Dr. Lukas. How has COVID-19 impacted your testing, your human subject testing?
Yes, thank you for the question. It obviously, in the very beginning, it shut us down. The hospital had to be closed to all research. The only research that was allowed to continue was research where individuals were receiving medications. And since this did not fall into that category, we had to shut down for a couple of months. During the process, McLean Hospital, and partnering with Partners Healthcare and MGB, we've developed protocols in place where it is now possible for us to safely test these individuals. So all of our staff are being fitted with N95 masks. We have a very strict number of people who are allowed in the building at any one time. We have a very strict protocol to only run one subject at a time, and only one subject can be in the building at a time. And every room that they touch gets wiped down with a bleach solution that we've been provided. And so it's just a whole concatenation of different procedures that we have put in place that's going to allow us. So we're just starting back up again now. So because the hospital gave us the go signal, as long as we meet all of those criteria. So we will be able to continue to do it. We'll be able to continue to do it safely. And then the last thing is that our hospital is looking into getting a testing facility, a testing set up here in my building. And we'll be going for the very rapid test protocol, which is the 5 minutes or 14-minute protocol. So we should have that by end of winter, early spring.
That's fantastic. That should definitely help out and get you guys back up and running full speed. Bud, real quickly, anything on your end?
In COVID, we actually were impacted where we had to shut down, and we moved all of our staff to work from home. But luckily, we had our staff basically come in and grab. To be honest, people had bits and pieces of cars on their dining room table, electronics on their dining room table to try to keep progress, and we were able to maintain a lot of that progress. We also were pretty lucky in that we were able to keep lab operations to a certain extent up, maintain our equipment, maintain our lab operations, primarily because we were supporting some of the COVID-19 efforts in terms of making face shields or components for face shields. So we had people in the labs that continued to work, and everybody outside the lab continued to work. The one item that was impacted is the human subjects driving. That we had to shut down completely, and we are still working on a protocol along with Dr. Lukas and coming up with a protocol that we can restart our human subjects driving effort where we put people in the cars.
Great. And Rob, obviously you touched on the outreach efforts and how you had to shift from in-person outreach to online educational efforts. And I don't know, did you want to touch a little bit more on the STEM project, public schools, and kind of give an overview of that?
Yeah, sure, George, absolutely. Our transition to the Discovery Hub, I think, was aided by the fact that we were already moving in the direction of establishing a STEM program built around the DADS program for Loudoun County public high schoolers. And in fact, our first session with those students was scheduled for early April. And a few days before then, of course, everything started to shut down. So not wanting to, we put a lot of value, obviously, on STEM, being scientists and engineers ourselves. So not wanting to lose that opportunity, we almost immediately began to see how we might create a virtual program for the students. And then from there, it was just an easy step to expand that to include everybody in the Commonwealth. And so I'm very excited, not only for the STEM program, because it's something near and dear to me, but also because of what we might be able to do, frankly, with expanding the reach of the program throughout Virginia. So as I mentioned, the irony is, in this instance, COVID might have done us a small favor.
True. We're very excited about it. We really are. And you guys have done great work on that. Dr. Lukas, I have a question here for you. So have you begun testing with people that have medical conditions such as asthma or diabetes, or that may pose an issue to the sensors? Any testing with folks with medical conditions?
Not yet, but that is on the horizon. Obviously, our strategy was to hit the most common scenarios first, which I've already described, and that we've completed a lot of those. The next step was to go into some of the environmental factors. So that's where the temperatures and the breath holding, whatever. And then the alternative drugs, such as the energy drinks and the marijuana and the tobacco. The next phase will be to look at medical conditions. So there's a condition called Raynaud's syndrome, where the circulation in the fingers is not very well established. So yes, we have every intention to do that. But you have to understand that individuals who have those conditions oftentimes are not supposed to drink. So one of the issues I'm going to have to do is make sure that I can do it in a safe manner, such that our institutional review board feels that we are not putting them at any kind of special risk. But yes, that is on the forefront. We are looking at potential medical conditions that could potentially differentially interfere with the devices. And again, I just want to point out the key word here is differentially. If a medical condition changes the way in which you absorb alcohol, and it's reflected in both the breath and the blood, or both the tissue and the blood, then it doesn't matter, because then the devices are doing exactly what we see in the blood. It's only if there's a differential effect that we'd be interested in seeing.
Gotcha. Dr. Zaouk, I have a question for you. Actually, there are a couple of questions for you. I'm going to try and maybe merge the two of them. So we are, humans are very inventive people. And, there is not a loophole that cannot be discovered by someone who has the will and the means and the time to do so. So how do you keep the system from being overridden? How do you keep someone from, starting the vehicle that isn't impaired, so that the person who is impaired can get into drive? And then I have a follow-up question to that.
So there are a variety of systems that we're looking at. Maybe I'll start with a touch-based system. And one of the things that we're going to be using on a touch-based system is the concept is we're embedding the touch-based system is into the push-to-start vehicle. Push-to-start button. Most cars have a push-to-start button today. So you press the start button, and that shines the light, and you get your alcohol concentration. Well, one of the concepts that we're going to use to make sure that it's the driver is basically use the seat mats that are typically used for occupant detection for airbags, whether you're going to deploy the airbag for small statured occupants or for a larger occupant. And we're going to use that to close an electrical loop essentially in the system. So if you're sitting in a seat, your feet are on the ground, you push the button, you essentially close that loop. And it tells me that it's the driver pushing that push to start button. So from a touch-based sensor, that's how it's going to work. And that's one of the ways. Clearly, there's always going to be a community that's going to try to break and circumvent and tamper with the system. And it's a constant battle that you have in the automotive environment, whether it comes to odometer fraud or modifying the ECUs on the vehicles. That's always a constant effort that's evolving. On the breath system, there are ways to triangulate the breath so that it only picks up on the driver. We know, for example, that there's concerns that if you're a designated driver and you have 3-4 passengers that have high alcohol concentration, is the sensor going to pick up? Our studies so far have indicated that that's no. It only picks up within the proximity of the sensor. The signal gets so diluted in the cabin that it doesn't really make it all the way to the driver's sensor. And most cars today are starting to be equipped with driver detection, driver drowsiness systems that involve video. We might be able to use some of that to screen whether it's a driver or somebody else breathing into those sensors. So it's a variety of ways, and it's going to have to adapt and evolve as we're going along.
I understand. Yes,
George,
go ahead, Rob. Yeah,
George, if I could just jump in for a second.
Sure.
And maybe this is where you're going to go with your second question anyway, but staying one step ahead of those with nefarious intent actually is not uncommon in the automotive industry. So, we know people are motivated to deactivate their airbags and their seatbelt warning systems, etc. Anti-theft systems. I think we're on the 8th or 9th generation of vehicle anti-theft system. More recently, as we increase the electronics content of automobiles, cyber resiliency is a bigger and bigger concern for us. And so DADs will just be one more thing that we'll have to track and stay one step ahead of those that have ill intent.
Yep, I understand. Now, Bud, back to you, and this is probably just a quick answer, but the question has come up with the breath-based system. These two things are taken care of with touch-based, but in a breath-based system, what about convertibles? And what happens if you've got your driver's side window down? How are these things factored into the breath-based system?
That's precisely the reason we're looking at two types of systems, the touch-based and the breath-based. There are applications where the breath-based is going to be challenging. It's an open environment. The sensor will still work. It'll still work in a directed breath, and it'll still work when the vehicle's not moving, obviously, where the air is not moving around the vehicle. But, if you have a convertible and you're driving down the road, it's not going to pick up. The air is too diluted around the driver, and it's going to be more challenging. I'm not going to say it's impossible because, the concept of sniffing alcohol, 8-9 years ago was impossible back then. And here we are today. But it's far more challenging than where we are today. And I think that's where a touch-based system will be more appropriate.
Understand. Now, okay, the next question I'm going to direct first to Bud, but then Rob, there's a component for you as well. So the question is this. Realistically, how far are we from at least having the DADS technology ready to go into vehicles in the general marketplace? And I ask you both this question because there's a technological, research and component, and also a component from the ACT's perspective in getting the manufacturers to want to put this in the vehicle. So realistically, how far are we away from that?
So from a technical perspective, we're very close, specifically on the breath-based sensor. So on the breath-based sensor, we are in generation 3.2, and generation 3.2 is evolving into a production version called generation 3.3. We just started testing that generation, and our goal is by the end of this year to have it ready for fleet application from a commercial perspective. This is a zero tolerance device where it detects the presence of alcohol. through a directed breath. And that's been also part of the effort that we're developing this SAE J3214 standard, because today all the standards are geared towards alcohol devices with mouthpieces. There's nothing that says, how do I test, how do I verify that this alcohol device that doesn't have a mouthpiece works properly and works according to a set of standards. So we had to develop a standard, and the standard committee is composed of OEMs, suppliers, breath alcohol ignition interlock manufacturers, academia, a variety of people on the committee. We developed this standard that we're going to test these sensors so that we ensure they're ready for use in fleet application. So our goal is, by the end of 2021, is to have the Gen 3.3 and Generation 3.3, which I have right here in front of me, and that's the actual sensor in its initial version to be tested in our lab, ready for deployment.
Great. Rob?
Yeah, let me add on to that. I mean, and provide for the viewers or the listeners the full roadmap. So as Bud mentioned, we hope to within 2021 release of the first fleet derivative of the DADS technology, breath-based directed breath. We hoped that we would follow that up around 2023 with releasing the touch derivative for fleet applications. And then shortly thereafter, release for the widely deployed market, the consumer market, the breath-based technology in 2024, and then in 2025, follow that with the touch-based technology for the consumer market. So these are projections. Again, this is invention. Frankly, made that much more complicated by COVID. It does challenge how we get things done. But that is the deployment horizon that we are looking at right now. From my perspective, it's not completing the technology development is just one aspect of ultimately ensuring the successful deployment of these technologies. I also spoke a little bit, obviously about readying the consumer market for the day when these technologies are ready. And that's why the Driven to Protect initiative is so important. So that when the technology is ready and we're ready to push it into the marketplace is expecting it and helping to pull it into the marketplace. So we don't want to get everybody overheated and then not deliver, nor do we want to work in a vacuum and then introduce the technology to an unsuspecting public. We want to build consumer acceptance, desire, and demand for the technology in sync with the readiness of the technology. But the thing that I spend most of my time on these days, frankly, and the reason why I'm now devoting all of my effort full time to this, is ACTS is a nonprofit. We will not be making or selling the technology. Rather, we will be licensing the technology to manufacturers who have the ability to mass produce it in automotive quantities, sell it, service it, fix it if something goes wrong in the field, etc. So a lot of what I spend my time on recently is just in setting up those licensing arrangements, making sure that when we're ready to release the technology, that we're developing everything that we need to do to follow through on those licenses. So there would be a whole lot of information that you as a manufacturer, if you were a licensee, would be receiving from us, so that you know how to build the sensor, how it functions, how it performs, what you must consider when integrating it into a particular vehicle design, etc. It's for me, it's really exciting to be thinking about that kind of thing. I love the science. The science is fantastic. but I didn't think I would get geeked about the business side of things. But it's really satisfying to be thinking about how this technology is going to be deployed in the relatively near future. The final thing I would say is ACTS, because it is nonprofit, it is a nonprofit, and we exist for the greater good. We must license the technology to all that have the ability to make it, sell it, and service it. So on the same terms. So nobody's going to get an advantage over another. So it's our whole focus is to see this technology deployed as widely as possible.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Robin. And just to give everybody a little bit of a heads up, we've got about 25 minutes left in the webinar, and I have about 14 questions on my screen. So I want to make sure that we answer the as many as we possibly can in our remaining time. I'm going to focus now on Dr. Lukas. There's a question here that there are a couple of different questions that get to the same point, I think. And I'm really going to try and put it to Dr. Lukas first, and then probably to Bud as a follow-up. But Dr. Lukas, in your research, you have a subject in the passenger seat. Now they have their own sensors over there, but and they've been drinking. But the driver has his or her own sensors, and they have not been drinking. So, and there are lots of questions that deal with how the sensors do or don't pick up alcohol detected that could actually be coming from passengers instead of the driver. So I guess my first question to you, Dr. Lukas, is during your human testing, have you noticed that that the driver's side is picking up any of the alcohol that might have been coming from the passenger? And have you ever had human testing with more than one passenger? And then my question for Bud is going to be, what if in the Uber Lyft scenario, you've got a driver who's got 4 drunk people in the car? How does the technology impact that vehicle? So I'm going to start with Dr. Lukas.
Yeah, great question. So, and then Dr. Zaouk will be able to answer a little bit more detailed about the engineering. But how we simulate it in our lab is that we test multiple sensors simultaneously. And some of them are very close and some of them are very far off to one side. And so that simulates the possibility of having a sensor in the driver's side being able to pick up the way that we're doing it. To switch it around, whether or not the sensors in the driver themselves, whether it would erroneously pick up the alcohol, we can see a drop off very dramatically when the sensors get beyond a certain distance. Dr. Zaouk talked about that distance and the different degrees in which they can actually detect the alcohol. So that's the first answer, is that we are actively testing that, and we can see a major drop off. And so in these particular scenarios, we can measure the differences between the two. And so you'll see a much higher concentration. And more importantly, Dr. Zaouk also talked about the fact that you're measuring carbon dioxide concentrations as well. And it's that ratio of those two. So you can tell from the dilution factor that that breath sample is not coming from the driver. It, in fact, would be coming from a participant. And the second question is about whether we study 2 people simultaneously. We have not at this point. That would be something down the line to see if there's any potential social interactions that might contribute to it. But again, I'll just focus on the fact that anything that you do to engage in any kind of additional conversation with somebody, if it increases your blood flow and you get hyper excited and that changes your blood alcohol, it's going to be reflected in your breath and in your tissue at the same time. I think Dr. Zaouk has a good answer for the technology part of that.
Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Lukas. I think maybe I'll go a little bit step back. In our development effort right now, and we touched a little bit on it, we're doing what we call human subjects driving, where we have a vehicle equipped with sensors on the driver's side for a sober driver, so a zero alcohol driver, and then sensors equipped on the passenger side for a passenger that we dose up to 0.08, typically between 0.05 and 0.08% BRAC or BAC. Then we take these 2 people and they get in the car and they start driving around for about 4 to 5 hours. We've collected so far about 114 different drives, about 114 different subjects, basically. before COVID hit, and have been able to analyze the data and see whether one of the questions that we had part of these tests is, does the passenger impact the driver sensor? What that means is the passenger alcohol concentration going all the way to the driver sensors, and is the driver sensor picking it up? And the answer is no, we don't see that. We don't see any evidence of it. It gets too diluted in the cabin air that you don't pick up on it. So, with a good amount of confidence, I say it's not an issue as of today. Could it be an issue if you have 4 people that are highly intoxicated in the vehicle? And to what level? Those are things that we're going to be testing in the future. So that's part of our human subjects driving. That's part of all the data that we're collecting. Like I said, 114 subjects. We have 80,000 different samples collected, thousands of miles so far, and we continue to add. And hopefully we'll resume sometime soon as we get past COVID.
And
Rob.
George, if I could just jump in there a little bit
Absolutely.
too. We're also working in an environment where nothing is static, everything is changing. So, for example, we know that at least with respect to the breath-based system, vehicle manufacturers are reinventing their automobiles to make them ever more fuel efficient. And they're looking at how their own HVAC systems function in those vehicles, and maybe providing less fresh air recirculations, etc. So we need to take that into consideration as well. And then just simply, this is probably, if you're a resident of Texas and it's quite warm, you may use the button on your vehicle to prevent fresh air recirculations to cool your vehicle down quickly. So there are all of these things are things that we need to take into consideration to make sure that we have a robust sensor that we're delivering to the product integrators. It's it's not a straightforward path by any means.
Absolutely. Okay. My next series of questions is going to be directed to you, Bud. So we're just going to stick with you for a sec. And this again is kind of a two or three questions put together. We've seen in this country that it's not always easy to get the public to accept something when you ask them to do something that they haven't had to do before, or accept a technology. I mean, we're in an era where wearing a mask during a pandemic becomes a political discussion. Where do you see this as being a mandatory part that they would ever be mandatory on a vehicle, or would this simply be part of a safety package that would be included by manufacturers? What can we expect from that aspect? Obviously, it would save thousands of lives annually. Would this be something that would be mandated on the public?
I think obviously I can't speak with 100% certainty, but from my perspective, I think as you deploy a sensor like this, and usually the fastest path for deployment is to offer it as an optional equipment. That's when you start seeing more adoption, and we start getting more data and understanding and refining and fine-tuning the sensor itself before it becomes widely deployed everywhere. But in general, the trend has been, if automakers and OEMs see that a sensor becomes, or a system becomes, a great safety system and provides greater safety benefits, they've adopted these sensors as part of their standard equipment. Case in point, airbags, all kinds of vehicle stability control is another good example where it's not mandated, but it's optional, and it didn't get mandated until later on after it's been widely deployed. So from my perspective, I think, the approach that we're taking is, the DAT sensor is going to be just like any other sensor you get in the car. Today you go to the dealership and you buy your vehicle, and it's equipped with optional equipment like blind spot detection, lane departure warning, and you'll have the alcohol sensing technology as an option. And as that option gets more and more bought, you'll see more and more demand and implementation of it.
Yeah. And Rob, I apologize. I actually meant to initially give you the first shot on that question. So apologies there, but this is your bailiwick. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, two things. One is, within the DADS program, our focus is on the research and coming up with a robust sensor. We don't weigh in necessarily on should the technology be mandated or not. But Bud is absolutely right. I mean, we wanted with dads to do something a little bit differently here. In the past, safety has been something done to you. You shall use your belt. You shall have an airbag. And we think that it's important for the overall success of this technology to bring the consumer along with us. They want it. They're demanding it. They're pulling it into the market as we're trying to push it in. The one thing I would say about a mandate, and without saying whether there should or should not be one, is that we have seen in the past with the case of airbags, with the case of ignition and locks, when you move to mandate something, you draw battle lines, and it becomes a political issue, and you may end up actually delaying deployment, not hastening it. And so our desire is to try to deploy it as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to stick with you, Rob, on this question. This is from someone who says that they personally don't drink alcohol. Why would they need this technology?
Right. That's actually a great question. And, I think we all need to, and we see this also with the face mask too, obviously. But I mean, we all, safety is a shared responsibility between ourselves, between vehicle manufacturers and those who use and drive vehicles. While you may not necessarily drink, others that use the vehicle that you own may well do. And also, we know that the typical automobile over its lifetime has 4 different owners. And so while you may not drink, the subsequent owner may. And we want this technology to cascade through the car park. The other thing I would say is that, and I just lost my train of thought, sorry. Darn it. It'll come back to me.
So, I mean, I can say, so the vehicle might be driven by other people who in a family who, you may not want to imbibe, you might have a teenager, for example, that you want to be able to make sure that they don't, that the car doesn't drive if they've been drinking. I think you anticipate being able to perhaps set a limit maybe for teens lower than 0.8, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Correct.
Yes.
And we would have to. So I just remembered my thought. I mean, the other thing is that for this technology to have maximum effectiveness in the marketplace in terms of preventing drunk driving, it does need to be widely deployed.
Right.
And so again, we would hope you would, want to be a part of that. We will need, obviously, we license people in this country, anywhere from age, I think 15 on up. And it's only legal to drink if you're 21 and over. So the systems themselves will need to have the means to be set at zero tolerance limit for those who are underage. But when we go to do that, it may also be possible and potentially likely that an OEM would allow you as the vehicle operator to set a lower limit than if it's set at 0.08 or 0.05 if it's the case of Utah.
Right. Dr. Lukas, I have a couple of questions for you, and they really relate to the selection of your test subjects. I think some people out there are eager to be one of your test subjects. I don't know why I say that, but I think it depends on which vodka you're using.
It does.
But no, in all
only Grey Goose, only Grey.
But the question comes: how do you select your test subjects? And then the follow up to that is: are you ensuring that you are getting a diverse cross section of people in terms of race and age and other things, so that you can see whether or not if there are any differences. I mean, that you didn't anticipate that, but might be out there between folks of different demographic groups. So I'll throw that question out to you to talk about your subjects.
Sure. So in the original part of my presentation, I talked a little bit about how we just throw out an advertisement and we look for people who are interested in participating in research. They, of course, are paid. I probably forgot to mention that. So these are paid volunteers who are willing to come to the laboratory. And the first step is to making sure that they can meet all of the health and safety requirements. So they can't have an alcohol use disorder, which is picked up in the SCID, in the psychiatric complex. They can't have liver disease. They can't have kidney disease or heart disease. They get a full EKG evaluation, blood chemistry. So the first thing, first and foremost in our minds, is making sure that the person is healthy enough to participate in a study in which we're going to be drawing blood from them at about 1 ml per minute over the course of some of these experiments last 2 or 3 hours, and that they can safely receive these doses of alcohol over that period of time. Now, in terms of the age and ethnic origin and sex, we are very good at being able to pick up males and females. So we are doing some of the studies where we specifically recruit looking for sex-related differences, because as many of you know, a man and a woman of equal body mass index, and they consume the same amount of alcohol, the young lady will have a higher blood alcohol concentration than the young man counterpart. And that's true throughout, and that's nothing new. We didn't discover that. That's been around. But what's nice about all of that is that the woman's breath and tissue samples also go up. Now, in terms of ethnic background, we are constantly trying to over-recruit to get the diversity that we would like. So we have gone specifically to target areas where we might think that individuals would respond to these studies. Historically, we have not had as many people respond. People of color just don't seem to participate in some of these studies because they don't call us. If they don't call us, there's no way that I can get them into the study. But we do actively recruit in order to make sure that we get a broader range of ethnic minorities and people of color. In terms of age, that's the one thing that we are specifically in these early scenarios, we kept the age range limited to the 20s and early 30s. We did that for a reason, because once you start adding too many variables in it, then we would not have been able to nail down the effects of the scenarios. Our next phase would be to broaden the age range and to start to study people in their 30s and 40s or 50s and 60s. So to get an idea as to whether or not age plays a factor. So those are planned to go after some of those other elements as well.
That's great. That's great. Thank you very much. Not final, but one more question for you directly, Dr. Lukas, is during this process, and maybe the answer is that exercise, what you found with exercise, but what has been the most memorable or surprising finding in your research so far?
Well, the exercise, I would pick the exercise one as well, not just because of the disco ball, but because what's interesting is that there's an awful lot of unclear literature out there about exercise and alcohol. And one of the problems has been many of those studies have collected one single blood alcohol sample at baseline. Then they'll take another sample at 30 minutes and another at an hour and another an hour and a half. And as you saw from the slide that I presented to you, we're taking samples every 2.5 to 5 minutes. And so one of the very interesting things and very surprising thing that happened out of all this is that while a person is engaged in vigorous exercise, the rate at which the alcohol was absorbed was faster. And so your blood alcohol concentration actually got higher while you were exercising, engaged in this pretty good cardio workout, much like doing the different dance moves. So that was probably the most surprising thing, because the literature had said both things. They said, exercise reduces alcohol concentrations, and some of the studies said that it increases it, but all of them had flaws in them that didn't allow for this type of an information.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Can I add one more?
Yeah, of course.
One more quick one. Sorry, this was another completely unexpected. In the last call experiment that we did, where we gave them the bulk of their dose during the early part of the study so that they were able to simulate drinking just naturally during the study. And then we called last call. And then we looked at that spike. You see the blood alcohol. So at the time last call, we designed the experiment so that the time last call was called, they were below 0.08. As soon as they drank, they shot way above 0.08. And here's the surprising thing. The magnitude of the increase in their blood alcohol concentration was greater than if they had just consumed that dose by itself with no alcohol in their system. So it shows us that once you start drinking, that last drink that you take has a bigger impact on your blood alcohol than it would if you were just drinking it as your first drink of the evening.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Bud, I have a question directed to you. Is it feasible to consider adapting the touch sensor to roadside testing, or even moving eventually towards evidential testing with the touch base?
Absolutely, I think so. I think it's a development effort, obviously, but I do believe so. The nice thing about a touch sensor is very linear in its performance. What that means, it's going to perform really well at 0, 0.02, 0.04, 0.08, whatever number you give it, it's going to perform pretty well. So I do envision that at some point we'll be able to get it. And specifically when we reduce the power draw, right now we're using 20 or 10 lasers to interrogate 40 wavelength. As we go to the 2 to 4 lasers or even 2 lasers, that power draw drops significantly. So now you can have a rechargeable battery that you can use, and you just need a touchpad. And our goal is to actually cover the entire palm of the hand, so not just the finger. So anywhere you touch on the palm of your hand, we'll be able to detect the presence of alcohol or quantify the alcohol concentration.
And to that, and also to that, and I'm sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, George, I just want to add to that, in our own efforts to license the technology, we're not limiting it to transportation related applications or use cases. We're actually considering or thinking that we would end up licensing the technology for workplace screenings for somebody that has a safety critical job function, or even non-transportation related, such as wearables, etc. So the technology, I think, as we shrink it, in particular, has a lot of versatility outside of the transportation sector.
Absolutely, and that sort of segues into the next very quick question I had for Bud, because I think we only have time for 2 more. But there was a question about whether or not this technology could be modified to determine impairment from drugs. And I know that really it's about lasers finding molecules. Could you put into this device other lasers looking for other molecules to give you those kinds of readings for, let's say, marijuana or other types of drugs?
Yeah, I think, without a doubt, there is an opportunity there. There's a potential there. It's definitely harder because now you're talking about much smaller quantity. Alcohol goes into the blood and it's in quantities in the parts per million. When you start dealing with the THC content, it's in the parts per billion. So the detection itself has got to be far more sensitive than where we are today and where we see the technology. But, we've seen leaps in technology over the past probably 5 to 8 years, and we anticipate that's going to continue. So likely, but you would need, again, some of the things that are missing is limits and quantifying impairment and all these things that have to go along with it to be able to develop a sensor that would work. But technically, I think it's feasible.
Great. Now, Rob, a question for you. You've had a tremendous amount of success in Virginia because of our partnership. How can other states get involved?
Well, we would like to have similar partnerships with other states. And in fact, we do have one, not as broad as that with Virginia, but we do have another partnership with the Motor Vehicle Administration in Maryland. But we would love to have partnerships, in particular in states where where we typically test our new products. So Florida, because it's hot and humid, Arizona, because it's hot and dry, Colorado, high altitude, cold temperature, Minnesota, cold temperature, cold and dry, etc. So we welcome the opportunity to work with other states. There's still a lot of testing that we need to do to make sure that we're able to deliver a robust sensor to product integrators. And I think also, I probably didn't emphasize this enough, even in the context of our partnership with you and JRT. Not only is there a technical benefit to putting these sensors in vehicles, but we use that also as an opportunity to communicate to consumers that this technology is coming and it's being extensively tested. So it's just additional opportunities to raise awareness and acceptance.
Great, great. And to close us out, the question that I know you hear a lot, and that I know that a lot of people would like to hear. It's on the minds of a lot of folks out there, and that is the question about self-driving vehicles. Self-driving vehicles, we are told, are on the horizon. Does that make dads obsolete?
Not at all, for at least two reasons. One, I think we'll have dads before we have self-driving vehicles. I think dads will be more widely deployed than self-driving vehicles initially. But also, once self-driving vehicles are deployed, at least initially, I see dads as being part of the interior monitoring system. So just like with, I think everybody's well aware of the fact that autonomous vehicles have this external sensing system that allows the vehicle to understand what is happening in the environment around it. By the same token, those vehicles will have an interior sensing system. And that's partly because we'll want to know who's in that vehicle and what is their ability to take over operation of that vehicle in an extreme emergency. And we'll obviously want to condition those decision rules on many factors, including whether or not the occupants have been consuming alcohol, and are they impaired?
Right, right. Well, thank you guys. Thank all three of you for your presentations and for your answers and conversation. I'd like to thank everyone who participated in the webinar for your great questions. They certainly sparked some really lively discussion amongst the panelists. And particularly want to thank our experts, Bud Zaouk, Dr. Lukas, and Rob Strassburger. We all appreciate the work you're doing to help eliminate drunk driving through the development and implementation of the DADS technology. So we wish you all the best as you continue this important work. And to everyone who took the time to attend this Ask the Expert webinar, I'm sorry we ran about 3 minutes over, but we hope that you found it informative and insightful. And we're excited about the DADS technology and the Driven to Protect program. And we look forward to seeing the progress of this life-saving alcohol detection technology in the future. We could not do this great work without the help of our supporters and partners. If you'd like to learn more about DADS or Driven to Protect, please check out dads.org. You can also keep up with the progress of the alcohol detection technology by following DADS and Driven to Protect on Twitter. At the end of this webinar, there will be a 3-question survey that will pop up on your screen. We hope you'll take the time to fill it out. And again, thank you for your participation and for your support of the DADS program. Stay safe, be well, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, George. Thank you, everyone. Great discussion.
Thank you.
Good job, George.
Thanks.